Welcome to 30 Minute You, the university launched for you, where your co-hosts go over real-world topics through a live mentorship podcast so you can walk away with the skills you need to succeed in your field in only 30 minutes. My name is Meer, one of the co-hosts, and I host one of the world's top mentorship platforms, where I interview people like the mayor of Miami, the founder of Reebok, and the former CEO of Chipotle to provide you real-life mentorship in your pocket.
And my name is Carmen. Over the last 10 years, I've launched over 70 companies spanning in industries like hospitality, real estate, retail, and cannabis. With hundreds of employees, I am an investor, lawyer, and educator.
And we hope you enjoyed listening to this show as much as we enjoyed recording it. We'll see you inside the classroom. How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to 30 Minute You. 30 Minute You is a new series within the More We Know podcast, which is the world's top mentorship platform. 30 Minute You is hosted by Carmen Rossi and myself, Meer. And today we're talking all things from layoffs, how do you go through a layoff, what's happening in the industry, and more. So I'm going to kick us off. Carmen, welcome back. You know, we're looking at 2022 and 2023. Layoffs have been through the roof. I mean, when you look at Amazon, Coinbase, Google, IBM, Facebook, Microsoft just laid off. Microsoft announced they're cutting 10,000 jobs. Mark Zuckerberg just finished up his earnings call where he said, this is the year of efficiency for Meta. This is the year where we're going to do things as a nimble team. You're coming off over the last 5 years where tech companies had all these employees. You look at the day in the life of a Google employee having, espresso martinis and cold brews and kombuches. And now all these layoffs.
Nostalgia, looking back at those.
What do you make of all this?
So what a unique platform and opportunity to sort of just do some macro, large thinking of the economy, and then how does it boil down into our everyday lives? Let's start with the economic outlook as it relates to 2022, and we've pivoted into 23. We've now seen the Q4 earnings come out. There's a lot of speculative announcements in policy shifting. So it shouldn't be that surprising. I mean, two things happened that are obvious, unprecedented, and not likely to occur again. There was a pandemic and there was massive stimulus. So, those, as a result, Amazon, fulfillment centers all over the world, tech, we need, because of the acceleration as a result of the pandemic, tech has to hire a ton of people. Well, now what's happening? We're just seeing in our everyday lives across every industry, we're beginning to settle back in. I don't envy Powell's job. I think he's doing a good job attempting to curb the inflation. But how does that impact us? And the sort of, all that stimulus money that was just pouring in massively from people, and they were going into the marketplace. So yeah, there's adjustments. I don't think, to me, it's not as, I try not to get so wrapped up into the expert sort of, the expert opinions, because if you keep it simple and just understanding what took place and the result and the sort of knee jerks, then we're probably landing where we should. The negative is everyday lives, and that is it's not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands across industry. It's millions. So on the policy side, here this is just 30-minute you, good talking points. How does this shape? Something to look out for. You had the 2022 elections. They were expecting a red wave. It was all the buzz. Didn't really happen, but it really shouldn't have. The larger election numbers are in 2024. There's more seats in jeopardy from Democrats than Republicans. As a result, the House now is with Republicans. And what I don't want to do is be boring, but I'll translate as to how this is interesting and why we should be rooting for some tough times. And that's where I say I don't envy Powell's position. So you've got these very embattled elections that are coming up, most notably the presidential. They need to make consumers and everyday voters feel good. They need to do that by, one way would be lowering those interest rates, getting businesses back to borrowing. If you do that and you do it prematurely, you will spiral into a recession. So you've got now all these politicians saying, I got a voter base that's screaming at me. We got to get these interest rates down. And on the other hand, if we do that, history tells us you are going to really spur a nasty recession. So I think it's interesting to sort of understand how politics, which even though we try to drown it out and it's just talking heads on every news media outlet 24/7, but it's of note how that sort of translate to our everyday lives. So now we're into these layoffs and these earnings, the year of efficiency.
What do you think of that when Zuck says that?
So, yeah, I mean, Facebook, which by the way, in February, this is now 19 years ago, Zuck started Facebook, the Facebook. Now it's just Facebook.
Oh shit, 19 years ago now.
19 years ago, February, yeah, 20, yeah. So they've got 3.7 billion users. I think that's fascinating when you consider the global population is 8 billion and that many people.
People forget they have WhatsApp. Like,
across their platforms?
Yeah.
Yep, totally. And he had, well, I mean, if you know, looking at that stock, it is having a huge rally, one of the biggest single days in the last 10 years. But consider what he did. I mean, and here's this juxtaposition of negative news. We're laying off tons of people, and yet a stock that's rebounding very well. I mean, I think if you held tech stocks in 2022, you likely still hold them now because they fell off of a cliff, unless you unfortunately needed to sell for cash. But now you're beginning to pay attention again, watching them creep up. But you're saying, well, you might be scratching your head and saying, wow, I'm hearing all this negative news on the amount of layoffs, but I'm very clearly watching the stock go up. For me, the year of efficiency is we all need to take a page, and this cannot be a quote or a T-shirt. But for the purposes of this conversation, let's take a page from Zuck's book here. And what he's talking about is our revenue models are where they are. You know, it's though our usership is up, these are our projections. And through those projections, I still have a responsibility to my shareholders in increasing the stock value. I'm going to do that through efficiency. If I can't attack the revenue because we're beginning to normalize coming out of the pandemic, we're beginning to go back outside instead of just sitting in our homes on the phone, on the social media platforms. Right. So how am I going to be able to outlook positive progress while, you know, I can't necessitate greater and further revenue at the scale it had been in the last 2 years? Well, he's going to do it through efficiency. The analogy that I like, for me personally, I can through with the restaurant business. So as you know, I have a developed hospitality portfolio, restaurants, neighborhood bars, all different styles, whether it's French, Italian, whether it's
in other cities
Spanish,
too, New York,
coast to coast, and nightclubs. But there is, and so while there's a lot of diversity of concept and genre, there is a practical, and by practical I mean there's a sort of business lesson that would translate to any of our businesses. So let's look at yourself. You're going out on a date, and you're going to spend $100. So for me, you're going to come to one of my restaurants, hopefully, and you're going to expect to pay $100. Maybe I got to you through some marketing ads, some advertising. I did a special, I promoted, I did an SEO, Google revenue, but that $100 is everything it took for me. I obviously have the restaurant, I have rent, I have labor, and you come in, you spend the $100, that's my revenue. So now we're just looking at that. Now, let's look at taking that $100, the $100 in revenue is going to be allocated through everything I just said. My ability to get you into the store, the cost of food, the cost of labor. So that $100 isn't $100. And this is very obvious, but this is kind of Zuck is talking about. The $100, while revenue, that's not net. Yep. You know, that's there's a fraction. I mean, in the restaurant business, you're profiting strictly restaurant between what, 3 to 5% is your benchmark. So you're talking about $3 to $5 on $100 spent. So that's obviously that's obviously a pretty narrow margin. Versus through efficiency, perhaps I've stretched some back of house responsibilities between, the prep cook now comes in and is the dishwasher. Perhaps I've eliminated a food runner job because I'm making the wait staff actually go to the kitchen and run the food to the table. So I've cut a job down. Perhaps, and maybe whether you can renegotiate your rent, whether you've curbed your marketing expenses, whether you've consolidated, whatever means of efficiency, that $100 saved is net $100. $100 of revenue, it might only be on that previous net $3 to $5. So there's obviously this sort of outlook from Zuck where he's curbing his employment, he's curbing his marketing strategies, and why is that important? I mean, while posting, he did a huge stock buyback, which
that stock buyback was interesting, by the way, because they have about $40 billion in cash, and I think they bought $40 billion back of stock. I don't know,
which paid off very nicely for him. While too announcing that the reality arm division lost $13 billion, which, I mean, once you get into the billions, it's just like overwhelming, the amount of money. But through all that, he's still saying, hey, positive outlook, not necessarily on revenue projections. We're not going to spike 14, 15%, but positive outlook because of slimming down. Yeah. So, I mean, the concept and topic of layoffs is not typically a positive one, but it's definitely a present one. Yeah. And we're I think it's because of brighter days ahead.
Yeah. One thing I'll say about the layoffs, like on the positive side, because Zuck made that comment, and a lot of ex-Facebook employees were pretty pissed about the comment about this year of efficiency, because it made it seem like effectively to some of them, like, hey, you're basically saying we weren't efficient. But I think you just hit the nail on the head. Zuck's comment isn't saying, if I laid you off, Carmen, and you worked at Meta, that you're not an efficient employee. It's more of this idea of working on a smaller team. And when you're smaller, you can get a lot more stuff done quicker, right? Like I look at, let's use one of your restaurants or nightlife clubs. If you have 10 bottle girls and 20 dishwashers and 4 front staff, if you have to communicate something to them, it's so much harder when there's 50 of them to get something done, or if you only have like 5 or 6. Like, the amount of nimbleness is key in that. But I want to ask you, you made an interesting comment, but one thing I wanted to note before that is, people are like making Zuck to look really, really bad in this. But if you look at even the layoff when he did it, everyone he laid off got 16 weeks of base pay plus an additional 2 weeks for every year of service. So imagine if you worked 5 or 10 years there, 2 weeks additional. And, an average engineer is making $250, $300 there anyway. They got a payout for all their remaining PTO. They got RSU vesting through November 15th. As you know, Meta stock, it's made so many engineers at Meta rich. They got 6 months of health insurance, 3 months of career support with the vendor, including early access to job leads and immigration support for workers on the visa. So although we can look at the negative, and layoffs are never easy, and you've done, I'm sure, many of them, right? They're not easy, but there's also, as a business owner, you owe your shareholders, your investors, and you got to be profitable and go through that. So I guess my question for you, Carmen, is, you mentioned if you're evaluating a role, like someone in the back at the kitchen, that you're looking to cut that role. When you're looking to cut a role, I'm curious, and I know the audience will be hearing this, like, how can you make sure you're not first on the manager or, senior person's list of like, okay, this person's got to go. Like, what can I do right now as an employee, like if I worked for you, to make sure if you do have to make a tough decision, I'm not your first go-to?
Sure, there's a lot to unpack there. For starters, Zuckerberg has to be one of the more vilified people. And it's becoming like famously consistent. I'm not giving praise, but I didn't know the exit sort of package that all these, that is significant.
That's significant.
And should not be expected in most layoffs, as a benchmark. Obviously, he ran an economic model that said, even while we're giving all of this money, we're still so much further ahead with the layoffs. When it comes to forecasting, I think part of the reason we are where we are in our economy in 2023, and I don't think 2022 was a great year because 21 was so explosive, particularly in tech and crypto. 22 definitely came down, and now we're beginning. But there was a lot of knee jerking, right? Like Amazon, Amazon is struggling. They barely hit their mark on their earnings, but they knee jerked. I mean, they're already subleasing a lot of space in their fulfillment centers. They didn't necessarily. I can't presuppose that these conversations didn't take place at one of the most successful companies in the history, but the projection with which the economy sort of leveled was faster than and more abrupt than they expected, which is an obvious. So now let's make it back to the business. Okay, so you're going into a slow season. I wouldn't describe what we are in as a recession, and nor do experts or most, but nor do I believe we're going into one. Though even earlier I said there's a way for it to happen if the political pressure mounts, for example. But the forecasting, and the way I like to look at that is here's the problem. Here's a problem. Revenues are down. Here's a problem. Profits are down. So let's call the meeting and think about it. I really like, and I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but I'll do so through paraphrase. Albert Einstein sort of said, if I've got an hour, if I've got a problem and an hour to think about it, the first 55 minutes are just spent thinking about the problem. And then the last 5 minutes is the call to action. Whereas if, using that same sort of hour meeting to talk about our problem, we're not just throwing like, let's do this and that, let's just think about it. Let's really wear the problem, understand, what's happening, why it's happening. Is this a result of, let's stick with the restaurant. Is this a result of the bad service? Is this a result of a shift in trend? Is the location, is this a result of the location, sort of the demographics changing? Or is this a result of just, it's a slow time of the year? Every year, we're filming this from Chicago. Every year, the year kicks off in the 3 brutally cold months. Next year, it's not going to be summer in January. So, there's some anticipation there and forecasting. So when we try to look at it, it's more of, layoffs are part of it. You'd love to be able to imagine that, the number of employees are needed and always growing because of revenue. But when revenue levels or when revenue drops, layoffs are typically the first sort of the first sort of line of defense. The way that I look at it, less about the resume, less about, let's say we're talking about individual people one by one, or the time that you've worked here, right? You'd want to romanticize and imagine that, well, I've been here for 15 years. They're not getting rid of me. Or, oh, look at my resume. I'm one of the most heralded or rewarded sort of in my profession. They're not getting rid of me. That's dangerous. That's talking about complacency. And for me, the first thing I look at is enthusiasm and attitude and positive. That's a team member we can't lose. Like their energy, they bring everybody up, they check their problems at the door. Somebody's always coming to work with some baggage. Yeah. I mean, I don't care what your job is. You had a fight at home, you have a family health problem, your fantasy football team went to shit, whatever the thing is, you're coming to the door with it. Tough employees are the ones that then wear it and that negativity, and they're talking about it and they can't shake that attitude, particularly when personality is part of the profession. So sales, but certainly hospitality, certainly service. And so what I like to look at when we're having this conversation of layoffs, and we do, it's always on the agenda somewhere.
You guys always have it on the agenda?
It just is. And whether you're taking the GM, one of their famous CEOs, the sort of bottom 10%, you're always lopping off the bottom 10%. So you're always improving and adding, or just as a result of forecasting on revenue, and time of the year, seasonality. It's always part of the conversation. But my first sort of thing is enthusiasm, and that sort of your passion, and you would say like really over skill set. And a lot of the times, especially in whether it's trades or otherwise, we'll teach you. We could teach you to perform in any industry. Maybe not a doctor in a week or a month, but in a lot of industries, because you've got the skill set to be able to learn. And so, but it's hard to teach attitude, on a consistent basis. So when you find that, those are the sorts of people you really don't want to get rid of.
I think it's refreshing what you just said there, which is because if I'm listening to this right now, 30 Minute You, one thing that is scary is sometimes, you might be a top performer, but at the end of the day, you might still get laid off. And the question comes up, well, why did I get laid off? I spoke to a lot of different CEOs in the last few months. It's such a fascinating topic to understand more. And it's crazy. Carmen and I didn't even have this discussion, honest to God, beforehand. What he just said there about enthusiasm, what do you guys think the number one thing that came up? That came up in every discussion I had with them, which is I can't have poison in my culture. And so even if I have a top performer, if that person is always negative, always complaining, macro outlooks are bad, I hate this person, this, HR said this, but this toxic drama, most CEOs and executives say they got to get rid of it, because that alpha is more important than your individual contributor role. It's like, because that toxicity that you have can then spread to 10 or 12 employees. So your individual performance might not mean that much when it's affecting 10 or 20 people.
It's a dark point. But I will attend meetings, and let's just say that on a weekly basis, but we keep every business is obviously its own entity, but it's got its own teams. So I'm probably the only common who's attending all these different team meetings. I can tell you more than anecdotal, layoffs, or just sort of, maybe on the agenda, it certainly doesn't say layoffs. It might just say culture. And that's the word you just said. Let's take a few moments to talk about our culture, who's a shining star, but also who's kind of lagging. And for me, layoffs and termination of employment is a part of the process. And there may be people who are listening to this right now who we're talking about you, and so consider this the warning. But I will terminate an employee even if we need the bodies, rather than meaning like we need the staff, because especially right now you're short staffed. There's. But I will terminate before keeping someone who is toxic.
Really?
10 out of 10 times. I mean, it's granted, this is not medical advice, but I always think about, I'd rather cut cancer out than treat it. And if you've got a bad attitude, and it's bringing down the team, I'd rather put our backs against the wall, stretch our own responsibilities. People have to work a little harder, pick up the slack, add on roles and responsibilities, maybe throw one of ourselves in, especially if it's management. We do that all the time. I'll send somebody from corporate to say, we have to replace this manager. So I understand there's nobody to hire right now, perhaps, but every day that we're keeping this person on is really hurting the culture, and that will translate into sales. And you let those problems snowball. But and again, it's a dark topic, so to speak, but the major takeaway is true in anything. If you're in a toxic relationship, if you're in a toxic friendship circle, if every time you hang out with this group of friends, you don't feel good about yourself, if you've got whatever the situation is, allowing, the idea of, well, let's just keep going and maybe we'll come out of this. Maybe things will just change. I mean, statistically, and we measure statistics in time, so to speak, that hasn't been the case. And so, yeah, I think, on the subject of layoffs. So now you're listening to this and you're like, why do I need to enroll in 30-Minute You when I was just laid off? And are you talking shit about me? Are you guys talking to me? No. Maybe layoffs are a result of we have no choice. I mean, I don't have the money to pay you because revenues are down, and layoffs also. The reverse is true, right? I'm stuck in a job. I don't know if it's my passion, but I'm just going to stick with it. Just another month, a couple months, because I got rent, I got this car payment, my phone. I just did it. I'm going to Cabo in 2 months. Now's not the right time. Well, sometimes you're kind of forced into it. Well, now So I'm not saying like, good job, you've been laid off. How exciting, or hopefully I get laid off soon. I'm not suggesting. I just think that there's other sides to look at it. There's opportunity in crisis. There's, and particularly when it's not in your control, meaning the post effect of a decision or resultant, then it gives yourself the chance to sort of consider and think about it. Take the hour to think about, the 55 minutes to think about it instead of knee jerking.
Wow, love that. That's key. Well, okay, let me, part of our show is we always like to end on a hot take. And for 30-Minute You, for guys just listening the first time, I throw Carmen on the spot. He doesn't know what the hell I'm going to say, and I just say it. Carmen, let me ask you, in relation to layoffs, have you ever laid off a really good friend of yours?
Yes. So I mean, I say yes like I've done it a few times, but yes, I've done it a few times. But I'll tell you, it's a don't do business with your friends. You hear that so often. I don't buy into that at all. Like, that is the most ridiculous thing ever. If you have a great friend who's really intelligent and passionate, and your relationship is strong, and you probably even care even more to find success because of the bonds of friendship, then yeah, be in business with your friends. Some of the lesson is when you force it. So some of the first companies I started in college, everyone was a friend, and they weren't just a friend; they were your peers. They're your age. They're your roommates. There's so much, if they're taking advantage, or if you're just not achieving at the performance output that you need to be, if just cutting it. Here's the advice. There's no easy way. I remember the first salaried employee who had a family that I had to fire, and nobody else wanted to do it. And I had to be like, I'll be honest with you. I wanted somebody else to do it, but nobody else. And then you got to kind of say, okay, Carmen, this is your responsibility. And it ends with you. So do it. You have to have the conversation. Don't practice for the 5 minutes before going into it. Don't drag it out. There's nothing more that needs to be said. This concept of exit interviews, perhaps constructive criticism, but I don't really think it's super important. And you don't need to get into an argument about it. You just need to, this is the advice part of having to do it, but rip the Band-Aid off. And again, that goes the same with a toxic relationship. We don't need to go to war over this. We don't need to argue about it, but so yeah, I've done it.
Love that. That is 30 Minute You. Thank you guys for coming back and enrolling into Carmen and Meer's 30 Minute University. We will see you guys on the next episode.
Thank you.